Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back, way back, to a time when philosophy and spears walked side by side. You're about to lie very still as ancient Greece breathes around you, its marble temples casting long shadows under the moon, the air rich with olive oil and distant arguments about justice. But don't get too cozy. You're stepping into a place divided, not just by mountains and seas, but by values so opposed, it's almost like someone took a nation, tore it in two, and told each side the other was an existential mistake. On one side, Athens. Glorious, chatty, confident. It sings with theater and democracy and columns that sparkle in the sun. On the other, Sparta. Silent, severe, and built like a weapon. They don't do drama. They do push-ups. You're about to sleepwalk through a conflict that reshaped the classical world. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. But that's okay. You just need to relax, listen, and let the war wash over you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step softly through the darkened hills of Attica, a quiet Aegean wind brushing your face. Athens is glowing below you like a spilled constellation, lamp oil flickering in windows, the last of the wine shops closing their shutters, laughter echoing down narrow alleys where philosophy and fish markets share the same morning breath. This city doesn't sleep, not really. It hums. You descend into its heartbeat. The Agora. That central square where ideas are louder than swords, where someone's always making a speech, or getting heckled for making a speech, or selling you olives while arguing about the definition of justice. It's crowded, messy, brilliant. Democracy here isn't just a system, it's a street performance. Then there's the Acropolis, jutting above it all like the city's stern grandmother, majestic, elevated, and always watching. You pass the construction crews chiseling the Parthenon into place, giant drums of white marble rising into something divine. Pericles, Athens' golden boy, is footing the bill with allied contributions, a clever phrase for what's basically imperial taxation with extra marble. Now you shift to the south. Down where the land flattens and the sun hardens everything it touches, Sparta bides its time. You don't stroll here, you march. It's quiet. Orderly. Every movement has purpose. The buildings are modest, the food is Spartan, because of course it is, and the boys are training. Always training. By age 7, they've left their mothers and entered the agoge, the brutal military education system that turns citizens into soldiers and soldiers into legends. And yet, it's oddly calming. There's rhythm here. Ritual. Even beauty, in the way the warriors move like shadows, in the disciplined silence that feels heavier than words. Sparta doesn't need to shout. Its existence is the threat. Two cities. Two philosophies. One dressed in flowing robes and debate, the other in bronze and brevity. And between them? A growing tension you could slice with a short sword. It's not just cultural, it's economic, political, psychological. You see, Athens is a naval superpower now, its triremes gliding across the Aegean like stingers, projecting not just force but presence. And Sparta? Landlocked and proud, it sees this expansion as more than a nuisance. It's a cancer. They both claim to defend freedom. But they define it differently. For Athens, freedom is self-expression, democracy, movement. For Sparta, it's order, obedience, and protection from chaos. And because humans are fantastic at projection, both cities assume the other is a threat to their very way of life, which, in a weird way, makes them both right. And it gets pettier. Athens had helped Ionia revolt against Persia back in the day, and Sparta didn't forget that little adventure. Sparta had opposed the walls around Athens after the Persian War. Guess how Athens responded? By building them faster, under cover of diplomatic small talk. So now you have this quiet, inevitable hum of friction, like the buzz of cicadas before a thunderstorm. You can almost hear the philosophers trying to debate it away, while the generals just start polishing their helmets. Here's your first quirky tidbit. In Athens, some citizens thought democracy would spread like fine wine. They assumed other city-states would want to be like them. Turns out, many preferred their own flavors. Freedom's a personal thing. And here's your mainstream science moment. Archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar around ancient Piraeus, Athens port, have discovered drydock remains that suggest Athens could maintain over 300 triremes at once, basically the ancient equivalent of having a nuclear fleet while your neighbor sharpens spears. Meanwhile, Sparta doesn't do fleets. Not yet. It relies on its alliance system, the Peloponnesian League, to keep the peace. Peace, in this case, being defined as, keep Athens from getting too uppity. The League is loyal, land-based, and thoroughly unimpressed by marble. Now let's sit in the mind of an average Athenian citizen for a moment. You've got your theater festivals, your participatory democracy, unless you're a woman, a slave, or a foreigner, so, not that participatory, and your enemies are always just somewhere else. Overseas. Over hills. You've got walls. You've got ships. You've got Pericles. Life feels secure, and now slip into the skin of a Spartan. Every day, you train. Every meal, you ration. Every stranger could be a spy. You live in constant readiness, because your biggest threat might be your own enslaved population, the Helots. The reason you're such a well-oiled war machine is because you have to be. Peace is an illusion. Preparedness is everything. Scientists still argue whether Sparta's militarization was a choice or a necessity born of internal rebellion fears. Maybe both. But either way, it shaped their psychology to see security not as a luxury, but as the condition for existence. And it all starts to come together, like tectonic plates preparing to shift. Athens glows brighter. Its influence spreads. It builds alliances that look like protection and smell like control. Sparta clenches its jaw, flexes its alliances, and warns that not all power comes from the sea. The sky darkens over the Peloponnese. You can almost hear the first drumbeat of war echoing in the minds of men who still hope they can talk their way out of it. But hope is a fragile shield. And in the distance, a small island votes on whether to pay tribute or rebel. You know how that's going to go. You don't feel it at first. Not the way a war typically begins. No trumpet blast. No sudden clash of bronze against bronze. Just a slow unraveling, like a frayed rope holding together too many fragile friendships. You drift down the jagged coastlines of Greece, eavesdropping on whispers, envoys arguing in shaded courtyards, merchants muttering in crowded ports, generals sharpening their strategies with every fresh insult carried by rumor or boat. The First Peloponnesian War, they'll call it later. But right now, to you, it feels like a creeping storm nobody can name yet. It begins not with Sparta, but with its allies, Corinth and Megara, who've grown increasingly fed up with Athenian confidence and commercial ambition. It's always the friends who get you into trouble, isn't it? Megara, that modest city tucked between Athens and Corinth, decides to side with Sparta against the rising tide of Athenian power. That's like moving out of a roommate's apartment by torching the couch. Athens retaliates by slapping on the Megarian decree, essentially a travel and trade ban, which, in classical Greek economic terms, is like canceling someone's Amazon Prime and cutting off all their goats. Corinth gets huffy too. It's not just about trade anymore. It's about dignity. And no city in ancient Greece liked to be treated like the backup dancer in another city's spotlight. And then there's Boeotia. This region sits like a mountain-wrapped cushion north of Athens, home to the famously belligerent city of Thebes. Boeotia starts getting feisty again. Athens takes preemptive action in 457 BCE, marching its hoplites toward Tanagra to push back the threat and flex some muscle. That battle, you march right into it now, is brutal and indecisive. A slugfest of phalanxes locking shields, spears splintering against armor, feet sliding in blood-soaked dirt. You watch young men disappear beneath bronze, while elders debate strategy back in polished stone chambers. Tanagra doesn't break the war open, but it rattles both sides. Athens eventually takes Boeotia at the Battle of Enophita, yes, in the same year. For a moment, Athens controls most of central Greece. You float over the conquered lands like a ghost tethered to ambition. And for a brief, flickering period, it seems like Periclean glory might actually cement a golden empire. But empires, like cheap sandals, tend to fall apart under pressure. Here comes your quirky fact. One reason ancient Greek generals rarely rode horses into battle was because their saddles had no stirrups. Imagine trying to throw a javelin or swing a sword while basically hugging a horse for dear life. No thanks. That's why they preferred standing shoulder to shoulder in phalanxes, less glamorous, more effective. The war simmers across regions. Aegina, a wealthy island and longtime rival of Athens, gets swept up in the conflict. You float down to its docks, where once busy shipyards now reek of smoke and silence. Athens lays siege, starves the island, and forces it into submission. Chalk another one up for team democracy. Meanwhile, Egypt. Yes, Egypt. Somehow, in a twist only the ancient world could make logical, Athens sends troops to support a rebellion against Persian control there. Why? Because fighting Persia is always in style, and because expanding Athenian influence to the Nile felt like the next logical step in a game of Risk. But it backfires. Badly. The Egyptian campaign collapses around 454 BCE, resulting in massive Athenian casualties. Thousands of men vanish into desert heat, the Nile swallowing their ambition like a myth. You hover above that loss, a quiet mass of bones and broken triremes, and you feel the tug of consequence finally pulling Athens back from overreach. Pericles, who's beginning to resemble less a statesman and more a crisis manager, responds by consolidating. The Delian League, initially formed as a mutual defense pact against Persia, becomes something else entirely. The treasury is moved from Delos to Athens, because nothing says, "Trust me," like relocating everyone's money to your house. Scientists still argue whether the League's transformation into an empire was inevitable, or simply a product of Athenian ego wrapped in noble intent. Maybe both. What's certain is that Athens now controls more than it ever intended, and responsibility has a way of demanding tribute. And oh, the tributes. You drift through small Aegean towns, places like Naxos and Thassos, where tribute is paid in coin, in ships, or in quiet resentment. The League starts to feel less like a brotherhood and more like a protection racket with fancier temples. By 446 BCE, Sparta finally stirs. Not in full force, but enough to push back. A revolt in Euboea threatens Athens' food supply. Another uprising in Megara follows. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, word comes that a Spartan army is marching toward Attica. Pericles, once again the conductor of this chaotic symphony, acts swiftly. He suppresses the Euboean revolt, pulls out of Boeotia, and agrees to a 30-year peace treaty with Sparta. The Treaty of 446 BCE, technically 445, depending on how you date Greek calendars, is signed with a sigh rather than a cheer. You hover above the stone where it's etched, the ink of compromise still fresh and humming with tension. The First Peloponnesian War ends not with a triumph, but a stalemate. A breath. A break. Here's your science fact. Ice core samples from Greenland suggest that this period of classical antiquity experienced a minor cooling trend, likely tied to volcanic activity, that may have affected agriculture and, indirectly, population stability. Less wheat equals more tension. But the peace feels hollow. Temporary. Like duct tape on a cracked amphora, you drift through the agora and hear merchants betting on when the next war will start, not if. Philosophers lecture on the nature of power, their voices heavy with the weariness of hindsight in real time. Athens rebuilds its fleet. Sparta doubles down on land drills. The League continues to expand. Every moment of peace feels like it's tightening the spring of an enormous, invisible trap. And then, in the distance, you hear a new name echoing through the marble colonnades and Spartan training fields alike: Corcyra. It always starts with an island, doesn't it? You glide over the Ionian Sea now, its surface rippling with the low hum of tension. Sunlight catches on the water like slivers of polished bronze. Beneath you lies Corcyra, modern-day Corfu, a shimmering green island nestled between the Greek mainland and the heel of Italy's boot. Idyllic, sure, but tonight you're here because Corcyra is about to toss a burning log into a powder keg soaked in a decade's worth of old grudges and unfinished business. You feel it immediately. The island is bristling. Not with armies yet, but with ambition. Corcyra, though technically a colony of Corinth, has grown bold. Powerful. It boasts one of the strongest navies in Greece, second only to, you guessed it, Athens. That makes Corinth nervous. And nervous Corinth tends to lash out like a cornered sea snake. There's a dispute, of course there's a dispute. Corcyra and Corinth are arguing over the fate of Epidamnus, a city further up the coast, wedged awkwardly into the Adriatic shoreline. Epidamnus is like the distant cousin nobody wants to claim until there's money involved. And now, suddenly, everyone wants custody. Corcyra backs one political faction. Corinth backs the other. Things escalate. Skirmishes turn into full naval engagements. You watch the sea churn with black hulls and white spray as ships ram and scrape, warriors shouting above the din, their words lost to the gulls. In 435 BCE, Corcyra decisively defeats Corinth's fleet off the coast. And Corinth? Well, Corinth doesn't let things go. Not now. Not with Athens lurking in the background like a curious lion. That's when Corcyra makes its move. In a bid to protect itself from Corinth's inevitable vengeance, it appeals to Athens for an alliance. Not full membership in the Delian League, just a defensive pact. We're not asking for much, Corcyra says, practically winking. Just your help if things go sideways. Now picture Athens. You're drifting through the Acropolis, past white marble steps dusted with golden light. Pericles sits in council chambers, weighing this proposition like a philosopher deciding whether to pet a lion or poke it with a stick. He knows what's at stake. Supporting Corcyra risks war with Corinth, and by extension, Sparta. But rejecting Corcyra means missing a golden opportunity to weaken a powerful rival navy. Scientists still argue whether Athens genuinely wanted war or simply stumbled into it with too much pride and too little caution. Strategic necessity, or political ego? You'll hear both at symposiums over watered wine. In the end, Athens chooses a middle path that fools no one. They sign a defensive alliance with Corcyra in 433 BCE and send a small fleet to watch over things, just in case. Predictably, this watching turns into fighting when Corinth arrives with its own armada at the Battle of Sybota. Oh, the Battle of Sybota. You drift now above that beautiful, bloody coastline, watching ships crash like wooden thunderbolts. Athenian ships accidentally engage. Corinthian captains shout curses in 5 dialects. It's chaos on water. The Athenians don't fully commit, but they commit just enough to make Corinth seethe all the way home. You want a fringe tidbit? Here's one. Ancient Greek naval commanders sometimes brought birds, yes, actual birds, onto ships as omens. If a bird took off and flew left, it was considered a bad sign. If it pooped on the tiller, that was really bad. Imagine having your battle strategy altered by a seagull with digestion problems. Corinth returns home, wounded and furious. It demands retribution. It accuses Athens of violating the spirit of the 30 Years' peace. And then, because this war needs more fuel, Potidaea lights itself on fire. Not literally, yet. Potidaea is a Corinthian colony but also a member of the Delian League. Talk about complicated. In 432 BCE, Athens demands Potidaea tear down part of its walls, expel Corinthian magistrates, and generally start acting less shady. Potidaea refuses. Athens lays siege, and suddenly you're hovering over another agonizing stalemate. A 2-year conflict where thousands of Athenian hoplites waste away on the Chalkidiki Peninsula, swatting mosquitoes and waiting for a city that refuses to fall. It's less glorious and more grueling, like being trapped at a party with no food, no exit, and no one you like. Back in Athens, nerves fray. The Megarian decree, remember that, is still in effect. Megara, an ally of Sparta, has been economically strangled for years. Corinth uses this to rally the Peloponnesian League. Sparta, usually reluctant to act unless someone actually kicks them in the shin, begins to stir. The Spartans call a congress of allies. You drift into the smoky air of their stone hall, listening to fiery speeches from Corinth, Megara, and others. Athens is the problem, they shout. Athens wants it all. Sparta listens. Nods. Sharpens its swords. And then, Sparta issues an ultimatum: rescind the Megarian decree or face war. Athens refuses. Here's your science fact: modern archaeological digs near Potidaea have uncovered fortification walls and siege debris that confirm the siege's brutality and length. These findings suggest that logistical support was even more advanced than previously thought, especially in the use of portable siege engines and fortified camps. War is now inevitable. You feel it in the tremble of the earth as Spartan hoplites train in formation, in the restless lapping of waves beneath Athenian triremes. The 30 years peace breaks not with a scream, but with a resigned sigh. Everyone saw this coming, no one stopped it. By 431 BCE, the real war, the Great War of the Greeks, as Thucydides will dramatically call it, has begun. You can almost hear him sharpening his quill already. He'll record it not just as a historian, but as a man scarred by plague, exile, and the slow decay of idealism. And you? You drift through the agora once more. The torches burn longer. Men speak more cautiously. Women watch the harbors with tightened lips. There's fear in the air now, not just of battle, but of betrayal. The kind that grows in silence. Down in the harbor, you watch a young sailor carve a message into the wooden beam of a ship. It's not a name or a prayer. Just a single word: ready. You drift now over a dry, golden Attican plain, the grass brittle beneath your imaginary sandals, the summer air vibrating with the tension of a coming storm. But this storm doesn't roar through clouds, it marches on sandaled feet and bronze greaves. It comes in the form of Spartan hoplites, shields flashing like mirrors in the sun, spears tipped with quiet certainty. The year is 431 BCE. The Peloponnesian War has officially begun. You trail behind King Archidamus II of Sparta, a man with the patience of a tortoise and the gravitas of a marble statue. He didn't actually want this war, not really. He argued against it in council. But war doesn't care about reasoned voices. War cares about insult and injury, and Athens has delivered plenty of both. Sparta invades Attica that year, and again the next. Their plan is classic: march into Athenian territory, burn crops, topple farmhouses, terrify the countryside. Force the Athenians to come out and fight on land, Sparta's preferred battleground. But Pericles, still very much in charge in Athens, isn't playing that game. Instead, you float above a city in lockdown. Pericles has drawn all Athenian citizens inside the long walls, those towering stone corridors connecting the city to its lifeline at Piraeus harbor. It's a clever move, a kind of massive turtle shell strategy. Let the Spartans burn the land. Let the fields go to ash. Athens will survive by sea. But clever doesn't always mean comfortable. You hover through narrow streets choked with people. Farmers who've never left their villages now sleep on stoops and huddle under awnings, chickens cluck beneath benches, and the scent of unwashed humanity rises like a fog. You pass by the temple of Asclepius, where hopefuls still offer figs and incense. But the gods aren't listening. Because in 430 BCE, something terrible comes through those harbor gates. Plague. Nobody's sure where it starts. Some say Ethiopia. Others, Egypt. Thucydides, the brooding historian you've met before, calls it a sickness too vast for human speech. And you, ghost-like, float room to room, watching as the coughs begin, the fevers spike, and bodies pile in alleyways. No time for proper funerals. No strength for prayer. Scientists still debate the exact disease, typhus, smallpox, measles. One recent theory suggests it may have been a hemorrhagic fever, like Ebola, carried in infected cargo. Whatever it was, it hit with the fury of a divine curse. And even Pericles, the architect of Athens' greatness, falls ill. You find him on a shaded rooftop, shrouded in linen, his voice soft, his eyes glassy. He'll die later that year, leaving a power vacuum so wide it could swallow the city. And it does. What rises in his place isn't wisdom, but chaos. Let's lighten this just a bit, shall we? Here's a quirky tidbit. During the plague, some Athenians reportedly tried to ward off illness by smearing themselves with wine and garlic. It didn't work. But it probably made their funerals smell better. Back outside the walls, Sparta keeps marching. They invade Attica repeatedly, year after year, like clockwork. But the Athenians refuse to fight them on land. Instead, they send their navy around the Peloponnese, raiding Spartan allies and burning coastal towns. It's like two boxers punching in opposite directions. You ride now on the deck of a trireme, the wind slicing through your hair as 170 rowers churn beneath you, their backs glistening with sweat. It's hard, brutal work. But Athens owns the sea. And with their superior navy, they strike wherever they choose, like wasps jabbing at bare skin. In 429 BCE, they win a major naval victory at Naupactus, where a brilliant Athenian general named Phormio outmaneuvers a larger Peloponnesian fleet. You hover overhead as his ships spin in tight circles, drawing the enemy in, before striking like a school of daggerfish. By now, both sides are bloodied, but neither is broken. And then comes Plataea. Remember Plataea? The small Boeotian city that helped Athens during the Persian Wars? Well, Sparta remembers too. In 431 BCE, a group of Theban soldiers sneaks into Plataea at night, hoping to take the city by surprise. It goes poorly. The defenders slam the gates shut and trap them inside. A few escape. Most die. In retaliation, Thebes, a Spartan ally, lays siege. The siege lasts 2 years. You glide now over a city slowly starving. Trees vanish. Dogs disappear. Eventually, people eat leather, grass, anything to hold on. In 427 BCE, the city falls. The defenders surrender, hoping for mercy. They don't get it. The Spartans execute over 200 prisoners. The city is razed. Plataea is gone. And the mood across Greece darkens further. Want a science moment? Here you go. Archaeologists have discovered deep trenches around ancient Plataea, confirming the length and intensity of the siege. The placement of clay sling bullets and javelin tips suggests a methodical tightening of the noose, a slow, engineered suffocation. Meanwhile, Athens continues its own brand of ruthless efficiency. You now float above the island of Mytilene, part of the Delian League but tired of Athenian bossiness. In 428 BCE, it rebels. Predictable. What's less predictable is the fury with which Athens responds. After recapturing the island, the Athenian assembly votes, get this, to execute every adult male and enslave the rest. But then, remorse. The next day, the assembly changes its mind. A second ship is dispatched to cancel the order, sent out in a mad dash against time. You hover over both vessels on the wine-dark sea. It's a surreal race, one ship rowing for death, the other for mercy. Mercy wins, barely. Here's your third fun fact of the evening. Some modern scholars argue this moment helped shape the idea of democratic reversal, proof that even in ancient times, policy could pivot under moral pressure. Others say it was just a hiccup of guilt. Either way, the people of Mytilene breathe again. But the war, of course, does not stop. By 425 BCE, Athens is looking for a real break in the deadlock. You now find yourself on the western coast of the Peloponnese, near Pylos. Athenian forces, led by the crafty general Demosthenes, not to be confused with the orator from later history, fortify a little promontory. The Spartans attack. And for once, they lose. Here's where things get spicy. Spartan soldiers, real, elite, hoplite-tier warriors, get stranded on a nearby island called Sphacteria. It's a rare moment, Spartan soldiers trapped and vulnerable. Athens, shocked and giddy, tightens the noose. After some clever maneuvering, and despite early stumbles, Athens captures them. Nearly 300 Spartans surrender. Wait, did you hear that right? Spartans surrendering. That never happens. Back in Athens, it's like Christmas came early. Parades. Cheers. Schoolchildren chant Demosthenes' name between bites of roasted figs. The Spartans, suddenly embarrassed, beg for peace. But Athens says no. Why would they? They've just won the jackpot. And hubris, well, hubris is just Greek for, hold my wine. You're drifting now over a city basking in its own glow. Athens, still reeling from its spectacular win at Sphacteria, walks taller, speaks louder, dreams grander. It's 424 BCE, and the confidence of the polis has curdled just a little into something sharper, something close to arrogance. The Spartans have been embarrassed. Their warriors, the very symbol of indomitable will and eternal discipline, surrendered. Surrendered. It's like watching a lion roll over for a house cat. Athens should be untouchable now, right? But history has a sense of irony sharper than any Athenian wit. Enter the Spartan response. You find yourself now shadowing a figure who doesn't wear a king's crown or stride in battle formation. He's clever, measured, calculating, the kind of man who wins wars not with swords, but with strategies. His name is Brasidas. Sparta unleashes him like a chess piece nobody saw coming. And instead of marching on Attica or throwing soldiers into another failed island assault, Brasidas goes north. To Thrace. You hover over mountains dusted in pine, valleys rich with grain, and cities far from the Athenian core. Here, Brasidas moves like smoke. He offers freedom to cities under Athenian control, promises liberation from tribute and taxes. And you know what? It works. City after city opens its gates to him, not with resistance, but relief. You land now in Amphipolis, a jewel of the northern trade routes. Brasidas captures it in a blaze of tactical brilliance. The Athenians? They arrive too late. And the general who shows up, puffing and panting like a man who missed the last ferry, is none other than Cleon. Remember him? The loud-mouthed populist back in Athens, who opposed Pericles and then rose to power after the plague turned the assembly into a chaos carnival? Yeah. Him. Cleon arrives with reinforcements, and what happens next is, in a word, cinematic. At the Battle of Amphipolis in 422 BCE, Brasidas and Cleon face off. You perch above the field as two vastly different military minds clash, one bold and subtle, the other blustery and overconfident. The Spartans use terrain, speed, and perfect timing. Cleon hesitates, blunders, retreats. Both men die in the battle. It's a strange symmetry, two opposites removed from the board in the same moment. And suddenly, with no loud voices screaming for blood, both Athens and Sparta fall oddly silent. It's like waking up after a terrible argument and realizing no one remembers what started it. In this lull, another strange character emerges from the mist of history, a man as slippery as an eel in olive oil. Alcibiades. You float now through the elegant corridors of Athens, brushing past philosophers and statesmen, until you find him, young, radiant, charming. Picture a man with the charisma of a movie star and the morals of a raccoon at a jewelry store. He's Pericles' ward, Socrates' protege, and a walking paradox. He'll become the beating heart of this war before long. But we're not quite there yet. Right now, the war is tired. So tired, in fact, that both sides agree to stop fighting for a bit. You drift through the assembly in Athens as the Peace of Nicias is signed in 421 BCE, a supposed truce to last 50 years. Everyone's shaking hands, making sacrifices, smiling with their teeth but not their eyes. Here's your science break. A papyrus scroll found in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, provides a partial record of these events, giving us insight into the negotiations and what cities were supposed to return to whom. Ancient international relations in action, inked deals across a war-torn land. But you and I know what happens to truces in ancient Greece. They age poorly. It doesn't help that nobody really obeys the terms. Some allies keep fighting. Others ignore orders. And tensions bubble just below the surface like lava under a polished marble floor. Alcibiades? He's not interested in peace. Peace doesn't win you glory. He starts courting Sparta's allies behind Athens' back. In 420 BCE, he even becomes the strategos, the general, and uses his power to counter any move Nicias makes to preserve peace. The war isn't over. It's just on pause. And in the meantime, we get what can only be described as one of history's most spectacular intermissions, the Olympic Games. Yes, the Olympics. Back then, even bitter enemies laid down their weapons for sport. You drift above the fields of Olympia, watching athletes oiled in olive paste throw javelins, race chariots, and wrestle with the kind of intensity that says, I might punch a centaur later. And amidst this supposed unity, Athens and Sparta still manage to snipe at each other with glares and alliances. You want a quirky tidbit? Alcibiades enters multiple teams into the chariot race just to flex, and wins. Not because he drives. He hires the best teams money can buy and wins by proxy. It's the ancient version of fantasy football, if fantasy football involved real horses and actual royalty. Back in Athens, there's a cultural explosion, plays, art, architecture. The Parthenon glows in the sun, and Socrates wanders the agora, annoying people into wisdom. But none of it hides the fact that Athens is slowly sliding toward another mistake. Scientists still debate whether the Athenian hubris during this phase was driven more by military pride or by the intoxicating wealth of empire. The Delian League has turned into a cash funnel, and Athens is at the spout. And then, in 415 BCE, something truly bananas happens. A religious scandal. One morning, Athenians wake to find the Hermae, stone statues of Hermes scattered around the city, mutilated. Noses chopped off. Faces defaced. The statues were sacred, protectors of travelers. And someone's gone after them with a hammer. Panic sets in like fog over the harbor. Some whisper it's a sign of impending doom. Others accuse political enemies. And somehow, Alcibiades gets tangled in it. He denies it, of course. But the scandal sticks like honey to his reputation. Still, Athens isn't thinking about statues. It's thinking about Sicily. Specifically, about the city of Syracuse. You hover now over a map strewn across a war council table. Alcibiades argues passionately for launching a grand expedition west. He paints a picture of easy victory, of wealth beyond imagination, of Athens becoming master not just of Greece, but of the Mediterranean. It's nonsense, but beautiful nonsense. And people believe it. Nicias, now older and more cautious than ever, begs the assembly not to go. He lists every reason it's a terrible idea: distance, cost, risk, lack of intelligence. So naturally, they send him to lead it. Along with Alcibiades. Yes. The man who doesn't want to go and the man accused of religious vandalism are now co-commanders of the most ambitious expedition Athens has ever attempted. This should go well. But we'll leave that particular ship moored at the harbor for now. The sails are unfurled. The sun glints off a sea of bronze helmets and white linen as the Athenian fleet sways gently in the harbor. It's 415 BCE, and you're hovering over the greatest armada Athens has ever assembled. The docks are choked with onlookers, priests chant blessings, and nervous mothers clutch the shoulders of sons who pretend they aren't scared. The Sicilian expedition is underway. You float now between the decks, where soldiers sharpen spears, joke about how quick the campaign will be, and argue about who gets the best wine rations. Beneath it all, there's a steady hum of anticipation, like the soft roll of thunder you're not sure is distant or coming straight for you. Athens isn't just going to Sicily. Athens thinks it's going to own Sicily. And the target is Syracuse, wealthy, fortified, and stubborn. But here's where the story starts to wobble like a table with a short leg. Just days after setting sail, Alcibiades is recalled to Athens. Remember the statue scandal? The Herme? It hasn't gone away. He's accused of impiety and treason. He's supposed to stand trial. Only he doesn't. Instead, he jumps ship, literally, and defects to Sparta. Yes, the golden boy of Athens joins the very city-state sworn to destroy his own. You can practically hear the collective facepalm echo across the Aegean. Floating in his wake, you find the fleet leaderless, morale shaky, and the man left in charge, Nicias, more suited to paperwork than amphibious invasion. And yet, the fleet presses on. You hover now over the cliffs of Syracuse, where the city crouches behind thick walls and a proud military. It's not just a target, it's a stronghold. But the Athenians are confident. Too confident. They begin a siege. They try to build a wall around the city, a tactic called circumvallation, meant to choke Syracuse like a lion trap. But building a wall takes time. And the Syracusans fight back. They build a counterwall, a wall to block the wall. It's like Minecraft, only with swords and plague. Speaking of which, here's your mainstream science fact: siege warfare often turns cities into petri dishes. Waste, crowding, contaminated water, all ripe for the spread of disease. In fact, trench latrines discovered in ancient Syracuse contain bacteria consistent with dysentery and typhoid, supporting accounts of disease outbreaks during this siege. You float above muddy encampments where Athenian soldiers grow increasingly restless. Supplies dwindle. Desertions increase. And Nicias? He writes desperate letters back to Athens begging for reinforcements or permission to retreat. Back in Athens, the people hesitate. They've spent so much already. Turning back would be admitting they were wrong. So they double down. They send another fleet. And another general. This time it's Demosthenes. No, not the orator you're thinking of. This is a different Demosthenes, known for bold tactics and sharp instincts. He arrives with fresh troops and renewed hope. For a moment, things seem salvageable. But then, the moon happens. Yes, the moon. On the night before a planned withdrawal, there's a lunar eclipse. And Nicias, deeply superstitious, like many of his time, sees it as an omen. He halts the retreat. The army lingers. And that delay proves fatal. The Syracusans strike. They trap the Athenians in the harbor, bottle them up like sardines, and attack. The final naval battle is a nightmare, triremes colliding, rowers drowning, soldiers slipping on blood-slick decks. You hover above the chaos, feeling the spray of salt and the screams of wounded men. Fires blaze. Horses plunge into the sea. The Athenian fleet is shattered. Those who survive try to flee on foot. But they're hunted down, captured, or killed. Nicias and Demosthenes both surrender. Both are executed. And thousands of Athenian soldiers, exhausted, sunburned, broken, are thrown into the quarries of Syracuse. Literally. The quarries. You drift down into the white stone pits where the prisoners are held with no shelter, little water, and no hope. Bones litter the corners. Men drink from filthy puddles. Many never leave. It's one of the most catastrophic military failures in ancient history. Here's a quirky tidbit: some of the captured Athenians were spared harsher punishment because of their ability to recite lines from Euripides' plays. Apparently, the Syracusans were fans of Athenian drama. So yes, knowing your tragic monologues could literally save your life. Back in Athens, the mood shifts from disbelief to despair. The expedition has drained the treasury, wrecked the navy, and destroyed morale. The empire that once boasted it could rule from the Nile to the Black Sea now scrambles just to hold on to its allies. You drift above the Acropolis, where temples no longer gleam with pride but wear the dust of defeat. The statues seem to stare not into the distance but downward, ashamed. Scientists still argue whether this moment marked the true turning point of the war. Some believe Athens could have bounced back. Others say the empire was mortally wounded from here on out. What's certain is that the Sicilian expedition is a textbook example of strategic overreach. A city drunk on its own power took a gamble it didn't need, and lost everything it couldn't afford to lose. And Alcibiades? He's in Sparta now, charming the Ephors, seducing a queen, and giving away Athens' secrets like party favors. Remember how I said he was a raccoon at a jewelry store? Turns out he's also got a knack for sabotage. He advises Sparta to fortify Decilia, a village in Attica just a stone's throw from Athens. Sparta listens. They build a permanent base there. For the first time, Sparta maintains a year-round presence in enemy territory. The effect on Athens is brutal: farmland lost, trade routes choked, morale sapped. And Alcibiades? He eventually wears out his welcome in Sparta too. You're not surprised. He flees again, this time to Persia. Yes, Persia. The same old enemy from the Greco-Persian Wars. Now a possible ally to whoever flatters it best. You float now between all these moving pieces: a collapsing empire, a scheming defector, a resurgent Sparta, and it's hard not to feel the balance of power shifting. Athens had the best navy, the brightest minds, the most gold. And yet here you are, gliding over a city unsure if it's still the center of the world or just a crumbling echo of what once was. The war isn't over. But the dream? The dream is bleeding out in the marble dust. The bitter taste of defeat hangs heavy in the Athenian air, but surrender is not yet a word you hear. Instead, you witness a city clawing at the edge of collapse, desperately trying to pull itself back from the abyss. The shattered Sicilian fleet was just the beginning of Athens' unraveling, a brutal prelude to the storm that's about to break over Greece. The war is entering a new phase, and you're standing on the precipice, watching old friends become bitter enemies, and alliances shift like sand in a violent tide. The Spartans, having secured their foothold at Decilia thanks to Alcibiades' insider knowledge, begin to tighten their noose around Athens. You watch from above as farmers and merchants find themselves cut off from their fields and ports, their livelihoods choked by Spartan raids and blockades. Imagine the smell of burning crops and broken olive trees, the dusty roads strewn with fleeing refugees, the fearful whispers of families huddled behind shuttered doors. The long, grinding war that once seemed far away now drags into the very heart of Attica. Meanwhile, Athens scrambles to rebuild. The navy, once crippled by the Sicilian disaster, is patched up and sent back out, its sails billowing like ghosts across the Aegean. The Athenians rally their allies and resources with a stubborn, almost reckless determination. You float through bustling shipyards, the clang of hammer on metal mixing with the salty tang of the sea air. The scent of fresh tar and pine pitch fills the docks as new triremes take shape under skilled hands. Yet beneath the noise lies a gnawing fear: how many more lives will be sacrificed before this endless conflict ends? Back in Sparta, Alcibiades' fortunes wane. His charm fades like a candle flickering in the wind, and suspicion grows among the Spartans. You hear murmurs of betrayal and power struggles echoing through the stone halls of Lacedaemon. The man who once seemed unstoppable now finds himself isolated and hunted, a reminder that even the most brilliant players can fall victim to their own schemes. His flight to Persia adds a surreal twist to the war's tangled narrative. Greeks and Persians, old enemies, now uneasy bedfellows in the shadow of mutual advantage. And then there's the plague. A cruel specter that swoops down on Athens, invisible but deadly. You feel the stifling heat of summer, the dry, dusty air that seems to choke the city's breath. Streets once filled with laughter and debate now echo with coughs and groans. The plague ravages indiscriminately, young, old, soldiers, and statesmen alike. Pericles, the steady hand guiding Athens through these turbulent times, succumbs to the disease, leaving a vacuum that only deepens the city's despair. Scientists still argue whether the plague was typhus, typhoid, or something even more exotic, but its impact on the war's trajectory is undeniable. It cripples Athens' ability to fight, erodes morale, and fuels political chaos. You hear the whispers of conspiracy and fear, the rise of demagogues eager to exploit the crisis, the fragile threads holding the democracy together beginning to fray. Through all this, you drift above the battlefields and council chambers, sensing the profound shift in Greek society. The idealistic dreams of empire and glory clash with harsh reality. The war is no longer a contest of honor but a brutal struggle for survival. And somewhere in the background, the gods watch silently, their favor as unpredictable as the flicker of a candle flame. Remember the glowing algae in the harbor from before? Some ancient sailors believed such natural phenomena were signs from the gods, warnings, or blessings. Tonight, as you watch the Athenian fleet set sail once more, you wonder what omens they see, and whether those portents will save them or doom them further. You glide now over the shifting battlefield of Attica, where the war's toll is writ large in cracked earth and scorched olive groves. The Spartan army, having settled into a grueling siege around Athens, makes their presence felt daily. Imagine the dull thunder of hoofbeats and marching feet, the scrape of heavy armor against rocky paths, the sharp crack of spear tips striking shields. This is a war of attrition, slow, painful, and unrelenting. The Spartan king Agis too leads the charge, his figure cutting a grim silhouette against the bleak horizon. The Spartans establish fortified camps deep in Athenian territory, cutting off supplies and crippling the city's ability to farm. You sense the desperation in the air, the hunger that gnaws at the people's resolve as they watch their fields turn to dust beneath enemy boots. But Athens refuses to surrender. In the city's assembly halls, voices rise in heated debate, and the flicker of candlelight reveals faces drawn tight with determination. The Athenians innovate, rushing to build new walls, dig deeper wells, and secure whatever resources remain. The city buzzes with frantic energy, a testament to human resilience amid despair. You're drawn to the naval battles that reignite on the Saronic Gulf. The Athenian fleet, rebuilt but still haunted by Sicilian ghosts, cuts through the waves with renewed ferocity. Triremes dart like silver arrows, rowers straining against the oars, commanders shouting orders over the roar of the sea. The salty spray mingles with the sweat of men who know this fight could end everything or nothing. Among the chaos, one figure rises, Lysander, the Spartan admiral with a mind sharp as his sword. You notice how he studies the water and winds, how he waits patiently for the perfect moment to strike. His strategy is subtle, less about brute force, more about control and timing. Lysander is the kind of leader who doesn't just win battles, but shapes the future of war itself. Back in Athens, the plague's shadow still looms. You see the quiet grief in the eyes of survivors, the empty seats at crowded dinners, the lingering fear that death is waiting around every corner. It's easy to forget that in the midst of war, the enemy isn't always the spear in your face, it's also the invisible killer in the air. Scientists still argue whether the plague's devastation was as severe as Thucydides claimed, or if ancient writers exaggerated for dramatic effect. Regardless, the psychological impact is undeniable. The citizens' trust in their leaders wavers, and whispers of peace talks begin to circulate, though no one dares say it aloud. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood: some Athenians believe that garlic, rubbed on the body, could ward off the plague. Not exactly a foolproof cure, but it probably made for some interesting breath at council meetings. You drift upward, sensing the storm gathering on the horizon. The war has become a tangled web of alliances, betrayals, victories, and losses. And as the sun sets on this chapter of the conflict, one thing is clear: nothing will ever be the same. You find yourself drifting into the labyrinthine politics of Athens, where the democracy, once a shining beacon of freedom, now creaks and groans under the strain of endless war. Imagine the smoky rooms filled with murmurs and shouts, the heated arguments cutting through the haze of incense and flickering torchlight. The very soul of Athens is tested as power struggles break out among generals, politicians, and citizens alike. Pericles' death left a vacuum, and into that space stepped men like Cleon, the fiery demagogue whose voice booms in the assembly like thunder on a stormy night. You can almost feel the tension in the air, loyalty shifting like sand, promises of victory clashing with the grim reality of defeat. Cleon is loud, brash, and unafraid to stir the pot, demanding harsher measures against enemies and pushing for aggressive policies that both terrify and galvanize the populace. But not all Athenians are on board. Some whisper of caution, of weary patience, fearing that Cleon's approach will only lead to ruin. You watch the shadows lengthen over the agora, where philosophers and orators debate the future in hushed tones. Scientists still argue whether these political upheavals directly accelerated Athens' downfall or merely mirrored the broader chaos of war. Meanwhile, on the Spartan side, Lysander's cunning begins to bear fruit. His mastery of naval warfare and diplomacy quietly shifts the balance of power. You can almost hear the click of pieces moving on an invisible chessboard as Lysander secures Persian gold and allies, ensuring his fleet is better equipped and funded than ever before. The Spartans, traditionally land warriors, now wield the sea like a spear aimed at Athens' heart. The war drags on, a relentless tide that erodes both sides. You see the exhaustion in the faces of soldiers returning from battle, sunburned skin, ragged breath, eyes haunted by things best left unspoken. The scent of damp earth and sweat fills the camps, mingling with the ever-present smell of smoke from scorched villages. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. Some Spartan warriors, despite their austere reputation, had a secret indulgence for a fermented barley drink called kykion. Not exactly champagne, but it gave them a little buzz before the fight. Amidst all this, the debate continues among scholars. Did Athens' democracy falter because of the war's pressure, or was it already fraying at the seams, waiting for a crisis to expose its weaknesses? You float above the city walls, sensing the fragile threads holding everything together. Remember the garlic? Now imagine it mixed with fermented barley drinks and political venom. That's the kind of stew Athens is simmering in. And as you watch, the stage is set for events that will forever alter the course of Greek history. You float above the rocky coastlines and narrow straits where the war's naval battles have become a deadly ballet, each maneuver a life-or-death gamble played out on the shimmering waves. Picture the sun glaring down, the heat radiating off wooden decks, the sharp snap of oars slicing through water as triremes race in tight formation. This is the theater where Athens still clings to hope, its sailors fueled by desperation and the promise of glory. The Athenian navy, battered but unbroken, launches raids along the Peloponnesian shores, aiming to disrupt Spartan supply lines. You sense the adrenaline crackling in the air, the salty spray on your skin, the shouted commands echoing over the water, the clash of bronze against bronze as ships ram and grapple. The sea is both ally and adversary, unpredictable and wild. On the other side, Lysander tightens his grip. His strategy shifts from outright confrontation to blockade and attrition, strangling Athens' access to the Aegean. You watch as Spartan ships slip silently through moonlit harbors, their rowers breathing in unison, ready to strike when least expected. Lysander's partnership with Persia provides the funds and resources to keep his fleet strong, a twist of fate that few saw coming. This naval warfare is a prime example of ancient innovation. The trireme itself, with its 3 tiers of oars, is a marvel of engineering, requiring intense coordination and stamina. Scientists still argue whether the crew's physical endurance or their training was the real secret to victory. Either way, the human element can never be discounted. Back in Athens, the city grows tense as supplies dwindle. You imagine the smell of drying figs and stale bread, the clatter of empty pots in kitchens, the nervous tapping of sandals on stone floors. People whisper of surrender, but pride and fear keep them holding on. The democracy debates furiously, with some advocating for peace while others demand total victory. Here's a quirky tidbit: the Athenians sometimes used a bird called the hoopoe as a symbol of cunning and watchfulness. Imagine tiny war mascots perched on the edge of a warship, squawking warnings to their human counterparts. Amidst the tension, there's a strange calm on the water's surface, the eye of a storm that threatens to tear everything apart. You feel the weight of history pressing down as this naval struggle becomes the decisive factor in the war's final chapters. Remember that glowing algae from earlier? Some sailors believed it was the spirits of drowned rowers warning the living. Tonight, as ships slip through dark waters, you wonder if those ancient warnings still echo in the waves. You drift deeper into the shadowed landscape of Spartan politics, where power is as sharp and cold as the spears they wield. Imagine stone council chambers, their walls echoing with the quiet murmurs of elders plotting the city's future. The Spartan Gerousia, that council of wise old men, weighs every decision with careful gravity, but behind those stoic faces lies a storm of ambition and fear. King Pausanias and Lysander vie for control, their rivalry subtle yet fierce. Lysander's growing influence, thanks to his naval victories and Persian support, unsettles the old guard. You can almost hear the whisper of sandals on stone floors as alliances shift and secret meetings unfold in dimly lit rooms. The Spartans' rigid discipline contrasts sharply with Athenian chaos, yet their internal politics are no less complex. Scientists still argue whether Lysander's ascendancy marked a turning point in Spartan history or was merely a symptom of deeper cracks in their society. Either way, his leadership transformed Sparta from a landlocked power into a maritime force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, the war drags on with a grinding, relentless pace. You sense the fatigue in the air, the dust in the lungs of hoplites, the ache in sailors' arms, the slow burn of homes destroyed and futures lost. Yet, the Spartans' resolve hardens like tempered steel. They hold fast to the belief that victory is not just possible, but inevitable. There's a quirky side note: Spartan soldiers, known for their austerity, sometimes used peculiar psychological tactics, like whispering eerie war chants to unsettle their enemies before battle. Imagine the haunting echoes drifting across a foggy battlefield, unnerving foes before a single spear is thrown. Back in Athens, the city's mood darkens. Food shortages worsen, morale plummets, and the once vibrant democracy begins to fracture under the strain. You can almost taste the bitterness of disappointment mingled with fear in the crowded agora. As you watch, the final pieces fall into place for the war's climax. The tension tightens like a bowstring ready to snap, and the fate of an era hangs in the balance. The Peloponnesian War, a brutal contest of wills and wits, is about to reach its dramatic conclusion. Remember the sea's whispered warnings? They now mingle with the murmur of political intrigue, a symphony of uncertainty as history marches forward. You glide over the battered remains of Athens, its walls scarred and streets echoing with weary footsteps. The city is a hive of anxious activity, citizens whispering about the latest Spartan maneuvers and the dwindling grain supplies. The air smells of smoke from distant fires and the tang of salt from the nearby sea, blending into a heavy cloak of tension. Amid this turmoil, a fragile peace flickers into existence, a truce born not of goodwill, but exhaustion. You feel the weight of desperation in every negotiation, the careful words exchanged between envoys under guarded eyes. The Spartans, emboldened by their naval dominance and Persian riches, hold all the cards, and Athens must weigh pride against survival. This moment is a crossroads, the kind of juncture historians often debate. Was this peace a strategic pause or the beginning of Athens' inevitable downfall? Scientists still argue whether Athens could have recovered if given more time, or if the war had already sapped its strength beyond repair. The political landscape is no less fraught. Cleon's death leaves a vacuum filled by quieter, more calculating leaders. You can hear the low murmur of plotting in candlelit chambers as new alliances form and old rivalries simmer beneath the surface. A quirky fact drifts to you. Some Athenians believed that certain seashells collected from the shore could bring protection during these dangerous times, little talismans against fate's cruelty. Imagine the simple comfort these tokens offered amidst chaos. You sense the city's pulse quicken as talks collapse and hostilities resume, more vicious and desperate than before. The Spartan blockade tightens, and Athens' navy struggles to respond. The scene is a tense chess match played with real lives, where every move risks disaster. Back on land, farmers abandon fields scorched by conflict, the scent of upturned earth mingling with the cries of displaced families. Hunger becomes as much an enemy as the spear. The shadow of the war lengthens, wrapping both sides in a cold embrace of uncertainty and dread. You watch, suspended in time, as this ancient conflict edges toward its unforgettable conclusion. Remember the eerie chants and whispered warnings? They now feel like distant echoes, overshadowed by the grinding reality of war's toll. You find yourself drifting into the hushed corridors of Spartan victory celebrations, if victory can be called a cause for celebration in a land built on discipline and sacrifice. The air is heavy with smoke from burning sacrifices, the faint clang of bronze on stone echoing through the night, as the victors gather in austere halls to mark the end of a long, grueling conflict. Lysander, the man whose cunning has brought Sparta to the pinnacle of power, stands at the center, his presence commanding yet quiet. You can almost feel the weight of his ambition, the way his eyes scan the room like a hawk sizing up its prey. He is careful not to celebrate too loudly. After all, Sparta's glory comes with the price of vigilance and restraint. The defeated Athens is reeling, its democracy shattered, its walls breached, and its spirit broken. You sense the bitter wind that sweeps through its empty streets, carrying with it the echoes of once boisterous marketplaces now silent. The smell of burnt olive groves and trampled vineyards hangs heavy, a tangible reminder of the cost of war. Scientists still argue about the long-term impact of Athens' defeat. Was it the inevitable decline of a superpower, or did the war merely hasten a deeper transformation already underway? Scholars debate whether Sparta's victory marked a true ascendancy or sowed the seeds for its own downfall. On the lighter side, here's a quirky tidbit. After their victory, Spartans reportedly enjoyed a somewhat surprising indulgence, banquets featuring lavish servings of pork, a rare treat that broke from their usual austere diet. Imagine the shock of a Spartan soldier savoring a juicy roast after years of rationed meals. Despite the somber mood, the political games continue. Lysander's influence grows, and his dealings with Persian satraps create a new web of alliances that threaten to redraw the map of power in Greece. You almost hear the quiet plotting beneath the clink of wine cups, the subtle shifting of loyalties as old enemies eye each other warily. The war's end is not a simple story of victory and defeat, it's a complex weave of power, pride, and pragmatism. You sense the slow turning of history's wheel, creaking forward into an uncertain future. Remember the glowing algae, the eerie war chants, the salty sea air, they're all threads in this vast tapestry, reminding you that even in darkness, life goes on. You slip into the aftermath's slow, grinding rhythm, where victory tastes less like triumph and more like a bitter draught. The once mighty Athens lies humbled, yet within its broken spirit flickers a stubborn ember, a quiet resistance against the new Spartan order. The streets, now scarred and shadowed, buzz with whispers of what comes next. Imagine the once grand Acropolis, stripped of its glory, its temples standing like hollow skeletons against the pale sky. The scent of incense lingers faintly, a ghostly reminder of past grandeur now overshadowed by uncertainty. You hear the soft murmurs of citizens debating fate, whether to rebuild or resign themselves to subjugation. Lysander installs a puppet government, the infamous 30 tyrants, whose rule is marked by fear, purges, and betrayal. You can almost taste the tension in the air, thick as the dust swirling through narrow alleys. Families torn apart, friends turned enemies, the city's soul feels fractured, a haunting melody of distrust and sorrow. Scientists still argue whether this harsh regime expedited Athens' recovery by purging dissent or merely deepened its wounds. The true impact of the 30 tyrants remains a subject of scholarly debate, just like the long-term effects of the Peloponnesian War itself. Here's a quirky aside. Some Athenians reportedly held secret meetings disguised as pottery workshops, using the quiet clatter of clay and the smell of wet earth to mask their plotting. Imagine the irony of revolutionaries hiding behind artistic peace. Meanwhile, in Sparta, the spoils of victory bring their own complications. The new empire strains under the burden of control, the rigid society wrestling with the messy realities of governance beyond war. The Spartan warrior ethos clashes with the need for diplomacy and administration, a contradiction as stark as day and night. You sense the slow unraveling of old certainties, as the war's legacy seeps into every corner of Greek life. The promises of glory fade into the hard truths of loss, and the future waits quietly, an unopened scroll filled with questions yet to be answered. Remember the eerie war chants, the glowing algae, the silent sea, the world keeps turning, even as empires crumble. You drift now into the tangled web of shifting alliances and uneasy truces that define post-war Greece. The once clear lines between friend and foe blur like mist over the sea at dawn. Sparta's newfound empire is fragile, held together by fear and convenience rather than genuine loyalty. Picture the Persian satraps, watching from afar, their eyes gleaming with opportunistic calculation. They pour gold into Athenian exiles and Spartan allies alike, stoking flames of discord to keep Greece divided and manageable. You can almost hear the quiet clink of coins exchanging hands in shadowy chambers. Scientists still argue whether Persian interference prolonged Greek instability or simply accelerated an inevitable decline. Either way, the delicate balance of power teeters on a knife's edge, ready to tip with the slightest nudge. In Athens, remnants of democracy claw back from the brink. You can almost feel the hope in secret meetings held under the cover of darkness, voices hushed but resolute. Imagine the soft rustle of parchment, the flicker of candlelight on determined faces plotting a comeback. A quirky fact surfaces here: Athenian women, usually confined to the domestic sphere, played covert roles in supporting resistance, delivering messages hidden inside loaves of bread or beneath garments. You can almost smell the fresh bread and sense the bravery in every secret delivery. Meanwhile, the Spartan society strains under the burden of extended campaigns and governance. Their famously austere lifestyle faces tests from luxury creeping in, brought by spoils and Persian wealth. The contrast between warrior discipline and indulgent temptations creates a tension that echoes through Spartan halls. You sense the slow, inevitable change rippling through Greece, a complex dance of power, pride, and survival. The Peloponnesian War may have ended, but its aftershocks will shape the next chapters of history. Remember the distant war chants, the glowing algae on the waves, the salty air. You carry them with you, a reminder that even in darkness, life pulses quietly onward. You settle into the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of Greek city-states, a tension so palpable you can almost hear it crackle like static in the night air. The fragile peace established after the war feels more like a fragile ceasefire, a thin veil stretched taut over festering wounds and simmering resentments. Imagine wandering through Athens' cracked streets where rebuilding efforts clash with memories of destruction. The scent of fresh-cut timber and wet stone mixes with the lingering smoke of past battles, a strange blend of hope and decay. You can almost feel the ghosts of lost soldiers and fallen dreams drifting through the evening breeze. Sparta's dominance, once unchallenged, faces growing resistance not just from Athens but from other city-states eager to reclaim their independence. The balance of power is no longer a simple Spartan versus Athenian struggle, it's a complex mosaic of shifting allegiances and ambitions. Scientists still argue whether the war's aftermath laid the groundwork for eventual Greek unification or set the stage for centuries of fractious conflict. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a paradox of destruction sowing the seeds of both ruin and renewal. On a lighter note, here's a quirky tidbit. Some Greeks believed that hanging wreaths of olive leaves could ward off evil spirits and bad luck, especially during uncertain times like these. You can almost imagine the fragrant green crowns bobbing gently in the marketplace breeze, a small symbol of protection amidst chaos. You sense the subtle undercurrents of political intrigue weaving through the city-states. Leaders maneuver like chess players, their moves calculated but unpredictable. The old ideals of honor and glory mingle uneasily with the pragmatic demands of survival and power. As night deepens, you feel the soft hum of history's turning wheel, creaking and groaning but unstoppable. The Peloponnesian War's legacy lingers, a reminder that even the greatest conflicts eventually give way to the quiet resilience of life. Remember those eerie chants, the glowing algae drifting on the waves, the salty sea breeze, they're all part of this endless story, carried forward by the whispering winds. You drift into the twilight of this epic saga, where the echoes of war linger softly like distant thunder fading into night. The Peloponnesian War, with all its fury and fire, is now a memory etched into stone and soul, shaping the world in ways subtle and profound. Walking the quiet streets of Athens once more, you sense a city both haunted and hopeful. The scent of blooming oleanders mingles with the crisp sea air, a gentle reminder that life persists even after devastation. You hear the faint laughter of children playing near the ruined agora, their voices a delicate contrast to the harsh cries of battle long past. Sparta, too, bears the weight of its victory, its rigid society beginning to feel the strains of power and pride. You almost catch the faint whisper of warriors reflecting on the cost of dominance, the price paid in silence and solitude. Scientists still argue about the ultimate lessons of this war. Was it a tragic cycle of hubris and revenge, or a necessary crucible forging the foundations of Western civilization? The debate continues, as endless as the waves washing the shores you imagine. Here's a quirky final note. Some ancient Greeks believed that the spirits of fallen heroes could be summoned by lighting special lamps filled with olive oil, their flickering flames a bridge between worlds. You picture these soft glows illuminating the night, a gentle tribute to those who came before. The Peloponnesian War is more than a tale of battles and politics, it's a story of resilience, transformation, and the enduring human spirit. You feel the slow fading of tension, the gentle unwinding of history's tight coil. Remember the glowing algae, the whispered chants, the salty breeze, they carry you softly toward rest, a lullaby of time and tides. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, let the waves of sleep carry you gently away, wrapped in the soft embrace of history's endless story. The war is done, but the world keeps turning slowly now. The distant clash of swords fades into a soft echo, replaced by the gentle rustle of olive branches swaying in the breeze. You feel your breath steady, your mind slowing, like a calm sea after a storm. Let the warmth of ancient Greece's sun set low on the horizon, its colors fading into a peaceful twilight. Imagine the waves lapping quietly on rocky shores, the sound soothing as a mother's lullaby. The pulse of time slows to a gentle rhythm, inviting rest and dreams. Everything you've heard, every image painted in your mind, now settles like soft sand beneath your feet. There is no rush, no urgency, just the slow unfolding of night, the peaceful stillness where stories drift into sleep. Good night, and sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.